everybody. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live. As we all know, the digital revolution is in full swing here in our personal lives, our professional lives, and anywhere in the middle, if there is anywhere in the middle between those two spaces. And companies of all different sorts are trying to figure out their way forward. What does leadership choose? What direction to go in? And how does leadership influence organizations in times of massive change like this? And one of our guests today, Christian Anschuetz, has been that type of powerful visionary leader. He will decline, any such high praise, but he's done that in companies as a CIO, a CDO. He's been an entrepreneur, the captain in the United States Marine Corps. Christian, it's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be here, and it's always good to see you as well.
So, Christian, on this agenda, we talked some time about leadership, and you have said you're not trying to say you're an expert on leadership, but you've been in some situations. I think you're a student of leadership and its good aspects and, aspects that happen when leadership isn't quite right. And I know that one of the things that we thought we might chat about today was some of the work you're doing now in a consulting basis, and you get to see a lot of different sorts of companies, and then also just from your own personal observations of the business world. And you had some ideas here about strategy, right? Perhaps it's never been more important than it is today, yet there are not that many companies doing a real good job with that. And I'd love to hear what you think about that, and why are some doing it well, why are others not doing it well at all?
Yeah, so that's a big question, and you always have the big questions. It's a fascinating question. And it's complicated more by than anything, probably the executive ego, right? I'll get to that in a second. So, look, there's two processes that are responsible for making the great companies great, and then everybody else, what they are, average, right? And those two processes are strategy and governance. Mm-hmm. And of course, the two processes that most companies do poorly at: strategy and governance. Now, I'll give you an example. This is, I can't share an attribute where this is coming from, but I do a lot of consulting and advisory services, and I talk to a lot of very senior executives, a lot of them in tech space, right? CEOs and CIO, CDO types. And from a technology perspective, pretty much every single strategy that I get to put my eyes on sounds kind of like this: I've got to modernize my legacy. I got to move to the cloud. School Cloud Wars. I got to move to the cloud, and then something about people. Like that's like their strategy, and it's not a strategy. Mm-hmm. What we need to be focused on, of course, in business, right, are the markets that we serve. So we have to understand the right markets, the right parts of the markets, the right customers in those markets, and then what are they choosing us over their competition for? And that means a very, very, very deep understanding of what the customers want. Mm-hmm. And then how you deliver whatever it is that you do, your core capabilities, either that you have or that you acquire, to deliver those things that make those customers pick you. Well, now that's what your strategy is supposed to be about. That usually does not involve modernizing my core technology, moving to the cloud, and something about people, all of which are important, but it's not strategy. And then what's worse is that when you don't have a good strategy, you don't have good governance. So for all your listeners out there, especially if you've been in any kind of large firm, ever been part of a firm where everybody kind of peanut butter spreads, everybody gets an X% raise, right? Regardless of whether that BU is, the future of the enterprise, or it's in that lower right-hand quadrant of the BCG matrix, it's a dog, and everybody gets kind of the same raise, and the investments, well, it's not really clear, like, which priority investment drives the greatest impact in the market, which drives revenue and the highest quality earnings. It's not clear. And so we just do this kind of peanut butter spread approach to governance. And so where strategy lacks, governance is, sort of follows in its ineptitude and sort of a lack of effectiveness. And I see it all All the time. I mean, you must see this kind of stuff too, right? I mean, by the way, you work with a lot of technologists. I mean, how close is that, right? I gotta fix my core technology, my legacy. I got to get to the cloud. I got to do something with people. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, Christian, I think it does in a couple of ways. And whether the leaders are technologists by training or not, I think that, nobody sort of gets it half right. I think most people don't get it half right. They're either stuck in that idea of it's a technology issue. And if I fix the technology issue, then my strategy will be fixed. Like you said, get the technology, switch to the cloud, then do something with people equals strategy. And I think the best ones always, again, whatever the background of the leader is, ones that said, let's start at the market outside and work our way back in. And then how do we build a strategy based on what's happening in the real world? Other than that, I think you're just dealing with stuff about, operational efficiencies. And you in a world that's moving as fast as ours is today, that's a tough no man's land to be stuck in.
Discussions, but companies pay an incredible amount of lip service to how well they know their customers, and they really don't. So I attribute this, but I was with a leading organization. Everybody in this country knows this company, right? And they were going through the client perspectives. Like, this is what our clients are telling us. And you could read it and very easily tell that was an internal marketing sentence. Like, your client never said that to you. Like, you never heard that.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm it's data point itself, of course. I'm a client of this company. I always have been. I have been for 30 some years. We spend a lot of lip service about how well we know the customer, but what we really know, what we really love in our businesses, it's not the customer, it's our core capabilities. It's what do we need to do to preserve that which we already do? What do we need to do to make that thing that we're most comfortable with, a little better, faster, cheaper? Not, where's the market shifting? I mean, Tesla, for crying out loud. I mean, what did they do? They didn't do something that the other big automotive manufacturers couldn't have done, but the other ones were just rooted in a model and candidly in a supply chain that made them incapable of moving into these new areas where you could have incredible performance, green and sustainability, at least the perception of it. Yeah. And practicality all in one that nobody else was able to do. And so now how are they rewarded? Well, the market's rewarded them well. And there's so many examples like that. But fascinating subject. Bob, I think I mentioned this to you at some point, but as you know, I teach strategic marketing at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I tell my students at every single class, I go, okay, the most important thing to focus on in business is, and I make them all say together in one voice, the customer. Right. And I know early on, as your listeners here will go, well, that's obvious. That's so obvious. And why are you making us repeat that, which is obvious? Well, it is obvious. It's obvious to everybody, but our context and the companies that we're a part of and that we serve. And we have a lot of issues with companies kind of forgetting who their customer is and what they actually need. And they fall in love. They're sort of addicted to that crack, which is their existing business model. And customer is somewhere number 2 or 3 or whatever. Yeah.
It sounds, Kristen, like some of those situations where you'll be talking to, different executives across a company and every one of them will say, oh yeah, I said, we need to change. This company right here needs to change. Now it so happens my group is fine, but everybody around us, they better change intensely, but not me. And you get a few of those people and it's going to take a while. So cracking some heads there, it has to happen. Now, Kristen, I wanted to ask you sort of as a follow-up on that. you had been, I think you had made a trip to Hawaii where you got to participate in a leadership program. I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and especially the takeaways that you feel were most important from that experience.
Okay. So you're referring to some of the work I've done recently with the military. So I recently went to in December. I finally got out of my my home in northern Michigan, and I went to Hawaii. Like they had me at Hawaii. Okay, so they were like, "Would you go to Hawaii?" And I'm like, "I will definitely go to Hawaii."
Not Hawaii to northern Michigan in December, right? But the other way.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I had to come back to Michigan in December, but yeah, it was from Michigan, northern Michigan to Hawaii, and I went to Oahu. I was there for a number of different reasons, but this was the date range it corresponded with the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. So I was there, sort of the first half then of December, and I was part of the Future Strategic Leader Program that a really inspired leader, the commanding general for the Michigan National Guard, has put together, and really kind of setting the tone, I think, for the National Guard and even the Army to no small extent, of how they look at developing their leadership so that they don't fall prey to what they call strategic narcissism. And it was a great program. The criteria in which to go and be selected for this investment, it was a significant investment. It was very high. They handpicked some of the very best of their leaders, and the curriculum was wide and varied. Some classified, some unclassified, a lot of different perspectives. It was just to make them sort of understand what real strategy is, how to identify it, how to recreate it, and then how to, of course, strategy informs action. How do they think about the follow-on, right? They weren't all generals, but there were some, most of them were not generals, rather, some of them were. But how do they then, action the strategies that they do either create or more likely are on the receiving end of? And it was a great program. My job was to provide unsurprisingly, perhaps since you know me, a different view into the world. So to kind of a challenging view, like, don't fall in love with your Kool-Aid folks, because this is how the world might actually be working. Well, the military is kind of like companies, right? They do what they do, and they kind of get stuck loving their core capabilities. And we've seen some pretty fascinating things where traditional forces are getting, very literally annihilated by low-cost autonomous systems. Yeah. You don't have to look too far to know what I'm talking about. You can find that in the news, right? And so, how are these leaders starting to think differently? Because maybe it's not rifles that they need. Maybe the battle will be as much in bits and bytes. Who knows? Anyway, maybe one of my key takeaways, Bob, and maybe this is just me and nobody else needs to hear this, but, I don't know about you, but I think I'm not alone in saying that the news, at least in this country, can be somewhat depressing at times. And I'm kind of naturally an optimist, but when I read the news, it would make me think that every American hates America, and every American hates their fellow American. I'm exaggerating on purpose, but there is a negative tone to the news, at least what I'm experiencing. And maybe it's just me. And I've never taken that too seriously, but I did notice the weight of it. And I noticed it when I was in Hawaii, because when I was around these incredible men and women in uniform and how dedicated they were to their mission, to their country, and this is so important, to each other. Yeah. And the quality of these fine people. I actually had like an optimism boost. You know how like some people take the vitamin D in the winter? It was kind of like my vitamin optimism that I got from being around these folks. And I'm like, again, what a strong, powerful reminder, at least to this guy, that the media is just a portrayal of someone's interpretation of the world. It isn't necessarily the truth of what the world is all about, because these folks were just Absolutely fantastic. I can't say enough good stuff about them. And I just feel so confident that as long as our nation is turning out people of that quality and that character, we're in good hands, both from a corporate perspective, but really as a nation at large. Probably more of an answer or monologue than you were looking for, but that's what I was.
No, Chris, it's absolutely that sort of thing. And I do think, where headlines, television news, I find so much of it repulsive because for whatever reason, and I think clickbait is too simple a reason. The intent there seems to be to frighten people, not inform people. It seems to be to divide people rather than giving people insight and information, allowing those people and having the respect for those people to make up their own minds. So yeah, I'm with you. It's an awful, that news business is an awful place. Yeah, your attitude, your heart rate, whatever it is before that, and then coming out of it, it's not a good experience. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum and see these remarkably capable, smart, dedicated, selfless, courageous people coming together like that. And I could see exactly what you said about how this is a boost of optimism here in what can otherwise seem a bad world. But I think the other thing, Christian, of taking that to a larger level, I don't think the news captures at all what's really going on. And I think it is a slice of something, but the bigger picture, I think most people I think would tilt very strongly toward, the folks you met with in Hawaii and dealt with, although those are probably some of the best of the best. But I agree. And maybe as leaders, right, you got to fight through that fog of pessimism and cynicism and fear mongering and all that other stuff. Let's be aware of what's really going on, and let's never shy away from having hard conversations about the things we need to do better, the things we need to improve, the changes we need to make. But to do so in this relentless drumbeat of negativity and all that other awful stuff, I just think is corrosive, and it's a terrible way, for any individual or any organization to go through things. And if I could say back to you, I didn't mean to get on my horse like that, but I sure agree with you. And it's hard to push your way out of that, but that's one of the challenges of leadership, right? Is help set the tone for the outlook that we need to have. Not everybody's personality is going to be the same, but we should have this same outlook about what our mission is, what we're doing about it, customer first, and let's go have some fun.
Well, and what's so interesting, and I love that you added all that, so thank you so much. But these folks, if there was a reason to have pessimism, you have to understand the adversity that they face. Okay. It's not the adversity that I have, which is I had to go back to Michigan and shovel snow. They're slightly higher stakes of what they were involved in. And by the way, I'm sure listeners could be going, oh, they're all wearing the same uniform. They're the same person. What a bunch of hogwash. What an incredibly diverse set of backgrounds and perspectives and whatnot, but not diverse at all in terms of their dedication to something other than themselves.
Yeah.
And it was so inspiring to see like so many people with so many different perspectives, so many ways of looking at how to get through the various scenario planning and the various things that were, talked about and explored. So many different ways of thinking about it and coming at this, yet then unifying still around the overall intent, the overall mission, the overall purpose, if you will, and having this ability to even, and I've saw this many times, agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Which is so fundamental to a leader's job, is it not? Which is we're to unify around the purpose and unify people to get to whatever the outcome is. And where we fail that, it's not to, we have to not become part of the problem where we make it an us versus them, because there's only one team that we're on. And that team, in this case, in the military's team, it's Team USA. There is no pitting. You don't win by pitting one part of, let's say, the Army against another part of the Army. That would be terrible leadership. And thankfully, they don't ever do that. But the media would have us do that.
Yeah,
they would have us do that. And again, it goes to show that maybe the media just isn't nearly as real as I thought it was. It doesn't represent the real world as much as maybe I thought it did in the past. And maybe my interpretation even right now as we speak is incorrect, but I will stand by what I said, is that it was like a double dose of optimism, of respect, of hope, seeing these great Americans, young and not so young, that represent our country and actually in this case defend it. And I was very pleased to have had the opportunity to be around them.
That's Christian. That's great. Hey, final subject I wanted to ask you about was, especially because among your various leadership roles you've been a chief digital officer. You had a couple thoughts about how the term and the concept of digital, what that means inside organizations. I want to ask you to talk about that, Christian, in 1 second. But first, I wanted to offer this thought from our sponsor, BMC. We all know what the A game is, right? Among athletes, it's the highest level of performance, and you can get to that level in business as well. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. It's when technology and people work in harmony, and that's how business reaches its A game. You can find out more at bmc.com/A game. So, Christian, you had said that, as we move the digital economy, the digital world, digital everything here, now this metaverse stuff, do companies understand clearly, what they mean by digital? And because if they do, fine. If they don't, how are you going to be able to engage in this and actively move forward into it? So you've had the impression, I think, that what digital means and what it should mean has been sort of elusive for a lot of companies.
Well, it's interesting, and I love the way you kind of are pulling this stuff together, because it isn't a rational or a logical build. Look, if we're going to do anything as a group of people, we kind of have to have a shared lexicon. And we kind of have to understand when we say the word tree, for example, what the word tree means. Otherwise, when we go to cut down a tree, someone over there is cutting down a maple, and over here it's a telephone pole, and over here it's, whatever. And I wax silly there, but to make the point, let me ask you a question. Just for you, if you were to ask 10 leaders, a CEO and 9 people on their management team, what do you think if you said to the average company, I'm not talking about like a high tech only, but I'm, just pick a retailer or a manufacturer or whatever, and you say, okay, hey, you're all about digital transformation. Okay, what does digital mean again? What do you think the 10 would answer that the same, what the word digital means? Or what number of them might even come close to agreeing on what it means?
I think it would come back to the systems they use inside the company, and think that that's the heart of digital.
Okay, so that could be how they define it. Digital could also be a channel. It could be around market-facing products, right? There's any number of different things, and even within each of those broad categories, there's all sorts of different ways to define it. I've taken to asking the various companies I've had an opportunity to query about this, which is a fair number. And I find that there's almost no consistent definition within an organization of what digital means, which is pretty scary. Yeah. In fact, if you look at some of the titles out there, like Chief Digital Officer and Chief Digital and Marketing Officer, I got a feeling that has a tendency to mean something different than like a Chief Digital Officer.
Yeah.
Where's the chief data officer in this? I mean, we could go down this, this rabbit hole pretty far. I would say, though, in response to your question, I find that because companies lack clarity on strategy, they often don't spend a lot of time getting clarity even then on like the most important terms of what they mean by the word digital. Yeah. And then let's ask ourselves, how expensive in real dollars and opportunity cost is it when we're not clear on what we're trying to do, the outcomes we're trying to create, and how we're going to get there? How expensive is that?
Yeah. And Christian, I think that's a perfect way to put it, because, I just from talking to companies, that's why I had that sense that if you ask about digital, there's still way too many leaders that think that is rooted in the type of systems they use inside their company, as opposed to the fact that, to me, digital means that there's pick a number between 1.2 and 1.8, maybe it's higher now, billion people around the world that want to live digitally enhanced, digitally modeled lifestyles, right? It's not debatable just through their actions. So given that external reality, how do I as a leader in a company align what I do, what I make, how I engage, the value I offer with that sense of these 1.5 billion, 2 billion people around the world that want it, and not necessarily a different sort of life, but maybe something like that. They feel that, so many of us feel that digital can improve the quality of our life, our work, whatever. And I just think that outside in has to be the way that more companies think about it, because otherwise, like you said, chief digital marketing, chief digital officer, chief data officer, you could slice those things awfully thin and not find much of a difference.
Yeah. And if I could go off on a total tangent here, and this might sound odd given my background, which is highly technologically, focused. If anything, the pandemic has taught me, it's let's be very, very careful in overvaluing these digital constructs where it takes people further away from one another.
Right.
I mean, at the same time now, you talk about Zoom fatigue. We got, we're pushing into the metaverse, right? And, I'm not saying that that's a good idea or a bad idea. I don't know enough to say. I'm sure there's markets out there. And I think there's a lot of proof that there's some markets out there, or there'll be a market in this metaverse space. And at the same time, I don't want us to kind of forget that there probably, a couple hundred years of sort of really massive and rapid technological advances aren't going to replace, hundreds of thousands into the millions of years of evolution. We do really need to work together. We do need to do it, not just to create outcomes, but because it for lack of a better word, it's good for our soul, our very essence. I'm not even trying to be religious about this. We need people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the more the technology separates us, the more, maybe that's what was happening to me and why I was so rejuvenated by my work with the military in Hawaii, is because that was all in person too. And so much of what my work had been virtual. Maybe that was an element of it too. I never even thought about it till then. But I think we got to be very careful that we keep digital in the box that it should be in, and we don't, push ourselves into the matrix. Remember, in the movie The Matrix, they're trying to escape it. They're not trying to get into it.
Yeah. I'm not always the best pop culture guy, but is that the thing too, where they're sticking things in the back of people's head? We've all got ports in the back of our head to, where somebody will animate us or tell us what to do or what to think, or, yeah, I'm with you, man. We got to.
Yeah. I think that's also called the iPhone version 18. It's not out yet, but it's just going to, the back of our.
Right. You want to have hands free.
I love Apple, by the way. I'm not making fun of Apple. I think they're a great company, but I stand by the joke. I mean, it's fine that we're so dependent on digital products, solutions, systems, channels, behavior. I mean, everything. And I think it's also fine that we remember that all things in life require us to consider balance. Yeah. And we need to balance our digital consumption with that makes us ultimately human. And there's many factors there. One of them being how we interact with one another, how we, like to maybe shake hands even. Oh, wait, no, that's taboo now. Fist bump or elbow bump or eat together or whatever. I mean, these things are, these things are important, folks, and they're important for us to realize, as leaders, that maybe sometimes what we need is like a return to the basics to really energize us. Maybe.
Well, Christian, my friend, wonderful stuff. Good perspectives. You touch on a lot of things. And I think, as always, it's so important how you nudge people to think about things maybe in a different way. Don't get overly comfortable, and remember sort of what the big picture stuff's all about. So as always, Christian, really enjoyed it. Thanks for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you. And thank you to all your listeners. Really do appreciate being here.
Yeah, Christian, thanks. And let me share along with Christian those best wishes to all of you. I hope 2022 is off to a great start for all of you. And we look forward to seeing you again soon here at Cloud Wars Live.